virus and what it's going to do to, as he said, I'm going to arrest the virus, not the economy. Number three, he's got to move on and get the economic team and the White House staff operating. And that is get a whole team in place from the economic team to the domestic policy and propose a set of ideas quickly that gives a sense of energy, purpose, focus, and determination. And part of that White House, part of that economic team and coronavirus team and foreign policy team is then to bring in the leaders and put it on them that we wear the American jersey together, that you have a role to play in solving this problem and not continuing the campaign, but to actually turn the page and begin the next step. And he does that with a sense of purpose, direction, and vigor. I do think it's important that the calmness he calls for was not just calmness and patience, but also it underscores the respect he has for all Americans. As he said from day one, I'm going to be a president for all of America. I think that is not.
Go ahead.
I think that is both a kind of a temperament as well as a message that he stays within that his wheelhouse. And it's true. I keep coming back to this. That is who Vice President Biden is. And the closer you are to the authenticity of not only your message but your character, and those two line up, the stronger it's going to be for you.
Campaigns reveal who candidates are. The White House reveals who presidents are. I want to go to John Santucci, our White House producer, who's wired into the Trump world. It feels as if the president's going through the 7 stages of grief right now. How are those around him going to get him to acceptance?
Well, George, what I've been told is that they're going to give the president the weekend. They know he wanted to clear his head, and he's doing that right now. He's at his golf course just a few miles from the White House. But what I'm told is let him get through the weekend, and then Monday there would be that come-to-Jesus conversation, if you would, with the president, that this is not going his way. And what aides have told me, really, is that, very slowly over the last few days, there has been that realization within the West Wing, within the president's family and campaign, that this was not going to be a second term for Donald Trump. And the turning point there, George, was when the numbers started to tighten in Georgia. Now, obviously, we haven't called that race, but it is certainly not looking good for the Trump team there. But, for this president, George, this is something that he really felt in the last couple of days. And Chris Christie made this point. If Donald Trump started to act more like he was ready for a second term in the last 10 days, I think it had a lot to do with Donald Trump being back on the campaign trail. He's dismissed the polls as something that he ignores, doesn't believe in them, but the crowds he does. He felt it. Aides I were talking to on the road said, we felt the enthusiasm. We really believed we were going to be back for another round, and obviously now that's not going their way, George.
John Santucci, thanks. You're seeing right there our crowds gathering in front of St. John's Church in Lafayette Square. Of course, that was site of the moment where President Trump went across that street as protesters were out there for the Black Lives Matters movement, brandish a Bible surrounded by military leaders and members of his cabinet, including the Attorney General, William Barr. Pierre Thomas, racial issues bubbled beneath the surface all through the presidency, bubbled up above the surface at Charlottesville and in so many protests across the
that Joe Biden put together one of the most diverse voting blocs that the country's ever seen. He got more votes than any other presidential candidate in history, including Barack Obama. And I was thinking about George Floyd and how that horrific death seemed to galvanize people of all races, all demographics, all ages, to say there were certain things that needed to change. And Joe Biden, at least from the empathy standpoint, seem to try to address both sides. Yes, we have to support law enforcement, but if you think that there's not systemic racism in law enforcement, then you're probably wrong. And the country seemed to agree with that. And the other thing, George, that strikes me about this announcement today is that clearly 68 million plus people, 69 million plus people voting for Donald Trump. There are a lot of good people who voted for Donald Trump. But at the end of the day, you had a lot of people particularly people of color, notwithstanding whatever inroads President Trump made with African-American males and Hispanic males, who felt like that Donald Trump was poking them in the eye from the very beginning. The Make America Great Again for many African Americans harken back to, well, what kind of America are you talking about? Back in the day, it wasn't so great for African Americans. So this was, in many ways, when people vote for someone that they wanted to defeat, usually people vote for someone they really love. I didn't get the sense from a lot of people in some of the data that we saw that people weren't necessarily in love with Joe Biden, but they felt that he was a better person in terms of bringing people together and at least respecting diversity, George.
You see the crowds growing there. Thank you, Pierre, in front of the Black Lives Matter banner there in Lafayette Square. It's a little after noon now here on the East Coast, 9 a.m. on the West Coast. And as you're just joining us now, we can now say that Joe Biden will be the 46th president of the United States. He's now president-elect of the United States. Matthew Dowd, he has a big job in front of him right now.
Oh, George, an immense job. And I was thinking of reflecting on a couple of things. As we said here, you've been in this position before, I've been in this position before, when you first learn as staff and as the incoming president that you've won, there's a sense of exhilaration and relief, but then the weight of what had just happened hits you. And I also think every time a new president is elected in America, it's a pivot point in America. Every single president that's elected the first time, it's a pivot point in America. And yesterday, as you remember, I was saying that yesterday was the 160th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln getting elected. And the parallels, not that Joe Biden is Abraham Lincoln, but the parallels are immense. It was a time of immense division in our country. And there was lots of change going on, incredible disruption, racial injustice, all of those things going on. And they elected a president who had immense personal loss in his life. He lost his sweetheart in his young age. He lost a child. He lost political office numerous times, Abraham Lincoln did, and he came into the presidency at a time when the country was torn apart. They didn't know which direction they were going to go, and they elected a man with a huge heart who'd been broken before. And the parallel to Joe Biden is incredible in that. All the same things. He lost a number of races for presidency. He's had immense personal loss in his life, and he's coming into a time in America which is as divided as it was in 1860. So the job is huge ahead, and the weight of that, obviously he knows that, but the weight of that for the staff now is going to fall on them very quickly as they go through this celebration today. But the weight of what just happened and what is ahead of them is going to be incredible on them.
There's no question about that. Mark, up the road, let's pick up on that theme right there. Presidents have been elected during times of division before. Presidents have been elected during times of economic upheaval before. Presidents have been elected during pandemics. The challenge ahead, so immense for Joe Biden as the country is still divided as he faces division in Washington, D.C. as well.
You're absolutely right, George. And as Matt said, it's the parallels to Abraham Lincoln are striking. And I think Joe Biden can look to Abraham Lincoln, as so many presidents have, for inspiration. And Abraham Lincoln said on the eve of the Civil War, a nation divided against itself cannot stand. He realized that we had to bring this nation together, or we would no longer exist as a country. And after the Civil War was over, he reached out to the vanquished South, the former Confederates, and he said, he essentially extended a hand and tried to bring them back into the fold. That's exactly what Joe Biden has to do at this moment in time. When John F. Kennedy became president 60 years ago, in 1960, with a razor-thin margin of 0.2%, he said the margin is thin, but the responsibility is clear. And Joe Biden's responsibility at this moment is to make good on his promise, to bring America back together and to resolve this confluence of crises that he faces. An economic free fall, a pandemic, and of course, the disunity that we find in the country today.
Mark Updegrove, thanks. Byron Pitts, one of the big questions is going to be, is America ready to unify?
George, I would say our history would suggest yes. As the people have been saying recently, we've seen these pivot points in our nation's history where we've been especially divided, but people come together. You know, George, in this moment, I'm thinking about Lyndon Johnson. who, when a moment in our nation's history when we were broken, when we were fearful, he stepped in. There are many people who will tell you some of the significant gains in civil rights occurred on his watch because he was a man uniquely qualified. Unlike President Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson was someone who grew up in the South, who sort of understood race relations in a way that only a white man from the South could understand. And so he could speak the language with some in the Democratic Party who were reluctant to move forward. So he was able to move the nation forward. And also, George, as I think about this moment for Joe Biden, I think of the late Billy Graham, who once said there are only two kinds of preachers in this world, the preachers who build you up and the preachers who tear you down. For many people, Donald Trump was the kind of preacher who tears you down, right? Part of his charm to the people who admired him was he called it as he saw it. And so that often meant demonizing other people. Well, Joe Biden is the other kind of preacher. He spent his political career building people up. And so I think, George, our history will suggest we have always been a nation divided. And I think President Trump took advantage of that, and one can make the argument leaned into that divide. Joe Biden, a different kind of personality, a different kind of leader, he will seek to bridge that divide, a divide that was in existence long before Donald Trump came on the stage, and it will likely, George, live long past us. And George, a final point, if I may, talking about Kamala Harris. This is a woman of color who graduated from a historically black college, Howard University. Historically in our nation's history, the vast majority of prominent black figures in our nation's history are people who graduate from historically black colleges. I would know in HBCU campuses across this country, there is a unique sense of pride. I know I've had family members and friends who've gone to HBCUs, and there is something in the fiber of that kind of education that talks about excellence and what excellence has to look like in a majority society. So I would think there are many avenues, parts of our country. Some people are upset, but many lanes in our nation that are celebrating this moment of change, and I think for many people, this moment of calm.
We are seeing people start to gather in Times Square as well. Heidi Heitkamp, that's a long way from North Dakota, the state that you represented in the United States Senate, a state that had become deep Trump country. How does Joe Biden speak to MAGA America?
You know, I think we all need to step back right now, George, and understand what's going on the other side. And on the other side today, there's going to be a rally at the state capitol in support of the president. Our entire congressional delegation is going to be there to speak. This is a long way from being over, and it's a long way from the country being able to heal. And you know, I know this is a moment. I think, as I said last night, it was that Biden winning is the worst kept secret in America. We've been there for a long time. The danger that we have right now is what's going to happen with the more militant portion of the MAGA movement, and how is Biden going to speak to the non-militant side of this, and how do we curtail and control this? You give this 2 days to fester, they already don't believe what the media says because they've been told for 4 years this is fake news. Today, we've underreported the fact that they lost a case in Michigan. The judge saying there's no there. We need to be talking about all the failure of raising these issues in this election and how those efforts are failing, because when we get that news out there, people start seeing the narrative that this isn't going to change. And so there's people out there who believe that you guys are wrong. He won the election. There's going to be an opportunity. And so I'd say that Biden needs to divide and conquer. He needs to speak to the portion of those folks and encourage calm. But I'm very, very concerned about what's going to happen in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Thanks for that note of caution. David Muir, perhaps one of the tools that he can draw on, one things that Joe Biden can draw on as he tries to speak to part of the MAGA movement are his working class roots.
No question about that, George. And now the hard work begins, as Heidi mentions right there. Once we see these crowds gathering both in New York City and Washington, D.C., we've heard of the loud crowds from Steve and Sami in Atlanta, the cheering in the streets. But this is really where that work begins. And we heard last night in our coverage from Governor Christie, this transition has already begun behind the scenes. It's something that the public doesn't see, but regardless of the outcome, based on statute, both teams, a team from the Trump White House and a team from the Biden campaign, begin talking immediately after the election, no matter who the winner is at that point, to make sure that there is a peaceful transition, one of the hallmarks of our democracy, and something that people have been so worried about as we went into day 4 and day 5. Now, of course, with a president-elect that will be Joe Biden. You know, I remember something Joe Biden said to me, George, in the weeks leading up to this election in that interview with Senator Kamala Harris after the convention. He said, "I'll be a president who tells the truth, takes responsibility." But this was important. He said, "I'll invite the opposition right away into the Oval Office to start getting work done. The words of a president matters. It matters who the president is. I'll be willing to engage on day 1 with Republicans to prove to this country that we can unite the country." And one note on Senator Kamala Harris, who, of course, is a big part of this day. She was out last night with the vice president on that stage. And I said at the time when we were talking about it that I thought it spoke volumes that the Biden campaign chose to wait for her. She stood there. She was planning to speak too, had the networks declared yesterday, and did not. They want to make sure that when she has the moment to speak on that stage, that she is able to be part of that moment, that she's making history, and that it's not lost on the country. And I gather that will happen, of course, now later today. And one thing Senator Harris said to me, you know, I've asked her about that question that was so often asked of her during the campaign. People would say to her, you know, will you be Joe Biden's vice presidential pick if that's what happens? And she would say, you know what? He's already proven he could be a good vice president. I'd be glad to pick him. And she always did that with a smile on her face, and it was probably an annoying question repeatedly asked of her. But she said to me in the interview, she laughed about it again, but then she turned it right around and she said, you know what? Joe Biden, for me, is a lesson in what a vice president can be. I have learned from him. What he did for Barack Obama is what I plan to do for him if we are elected. And this ticket has been elected, an historic ticket. And one more note on this. Hillary Clinton, who of course lost 4 years ago by, you know, under 80,000 votes, she's already sent out a message today saying this is history making. She has supported Senator Kamala Harris and the potential for history for the first woman vice president from the very start. She said also along the lines that the hard work begins now.
It is a day of firsts.
A lot of firsts, not just that it's the first time that you have a woman as vice president, but the first time that you have a woman who is first and second in line to become president. Talking, of course, about Kamala Harris and Nancy Pelosi. Also, the first time that we have a second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, the entertainment lawyer who put his job on hold for the campaign and to support it. First time that we've ever had the spouse of a president or vice president in this country be a male. This is also happening 48 years to the day when Joe Biden became part of the Senate. And wanted to just follow up really quickly, if I can, get this. Howard University sent out a statement. This is kind of playing off of what Byron Pitts was saying, saying, let it be known this day, you do not need to go to a Harvard, Yale, Princeton, or Brown degree to be successful. Our Madam Vice President went to Howard University.
Lindsay Davis, thanks very much. Rachel Scott, talk a little bit more about America's new second man.
Yeah, Doug Emhoff actually left his job at that entertainment firm to help Senator Harris campaign. He is her #1 fan. And we talk so much about the power of images in this moment and how Senator Harris says that her family represents America's family, that her story is the American story. She is the stepmom to 2 of Doug Emhoff's kids. They call her Mamala, a play on her name, Kamala Harris, obviously. But it's a blended family, and it really represents the diversity that we are seeing in America at this moment, and he will become the nation's first second gentleman, George.
Thank you, Rachel. Mary Bruce, Jill Biden, we haven't talked much about her yet, an educator, and we saw a little bit of that during the campaign.
She often comes out and speaks, you know, directly to Americans, directly to American families, especially in the midst of this pandemic, as so many parents, all of us juggling with this new reality, so many parents, working parents, struggling with how to juggle, you know, educating your children at home and balancing all of this. Jill Biden can speak directly to that. She, of course, made the rare decision when they were in the Obama administration to continue teaching. It's something that she may likely continue to do now. And of course, just her remarkable relationship with her husband and with the Biden family. You know, she really is, of course, a mother to his children, his two sons from his first marriage after his wife tragically died in that car accident. But Jill Biden, I think, is someone who really, like most spouses, humanizes her husband, tells a different side of him. In fact, I keep thinking about this moment a couple weeks ago where Joe Biden was out on the campaign trail talking to a bunch of reporters on the tarmac, and Jill felt that he was getting a little too close to reporters, and she just marched over and tugged him, urging him to get back, keep that safe, 6 feet distance. And Jordan, actually, we are getting some more reaction from the campaign now. We were speaking about Kamala Harris. She, we have learned, was with her family when she learned of the news, and we were getting some reaction from her family. Her niece, Nina Harris, tweeting in all caps, "Madam Vice President sounds pretty damn good." She also said that her 4-year-old came into the room yelling, and I quote, "Black girls are welcome to be president." We also now have the first tweet from the president-elect, and those who follow him closely on Twitter will notice that he has now changed his handle to president-elect. Joe Biden tweeting, "I'm honored you have chosen me to lead our great country, saying the work ahead of us will be hard, but I promise you this, I will be a president for all Americans, whether you voted for me or not. Will keep the faith that you have placed in me." George.
The consistent theme that he is hitting. We've got some news coming in from the state of Nevada. The Associated Press has reported that Joe Biden will indeed win that state. Let's go to Matt Gutman.
Hey, George, we just got new numbers out of Clark County. Again, that is the Democratic stronghold. 70% of Nevada's population is right here. They only released another about 15,000 ballots, but still, that puts President-elect Joe Biden up by about 25,000 votes at this point. That's a full 2%. At this point, it would be essentially mathematically impossible for President Trump to come from behind. So this is pretty much sealed for the Biden camp. They have been waiting for this for days. This has been a little bit more slow in coming than I think pretty much everybody anticipated. But finally, it's pretty well clear that Joe Biden has won this state, George. So haven't yet heard from the Biden camp, but I know they've been waiting for it. They're very excited by this, and we're going to hear more from them in a little bit.
Thank you, Matt. Luke Johnson next door in Arizona. You've gotten some more votes in there this morning as well.
George, that's right. It might not matter in the long run here, but we did get some more votes out of Maricopa County, and Joe Biden's lead is shrinking. But if you look at the big picture map here, it will be difficult for Donald Trump to make up ground. And again, for the Democrats and the Biden campaign, I'm sure they wouldn't mind running up the score when it comes to electoral votes. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But I just want to take a step back and talk about Arizona and the big picture in all of this. A deeply red state that is firmly shifted purple. And something to consider after talking to all these different voters here, Donald Trump was both the candidate and the issue. People rushed to the polls in record numbers to vote for or against the Trump brand. And we also saw that impacting some of the other candidates here, like Senate Republican candidate Martha McSally, who really struggled to identify herself and explain her ties and where she stood on the issue of Donald Trump. And that likely perhaps cost her in the end. But Arizona, very much a reflection of the rest of the country right now, deeply divided still, George.
Thank you. Well, let's go to Georgia. Georgia, new votes are coming in. Sivos and Sami is there. And Steve, Joe Biden's lead has been building in that state as well.
It has, and it has been some of a surprise to people who had expected these military and overseas ballots that are being counted to break in the favor of the president. But Joe Biden is now ahead by some 7,000 votes, up from about 4,000 just last night. You know, I also want to say that there are still votes that are coming in from a lot of the blue counties here. Gwinnett County is going to be reporting soon, Cobb County. You know, everyone, of course, here is watching the election being called for President-elect, who the apparent winner, Joe Biden. There was celebration in the streets here. You could hear it in the high-rises. I've seen videos that different people I know have posted from the high-rises in Midtown Atlanta of people, you know, using pots and pans to make noise. I will say something that, you know, this is a state, of course, where Republicans run the state and run the election. This is a very strong state for Republicans. And one of the things that I kept hearing from my Republican friends is that they were looking forward, if Biden won, to a little bit more boring. That boring would be good. And I think that that idea, the idea that some of what has been taking place feels somewhat like a circus was certainly a feeling on the part of many Republicans here who may have voted for the now president-elect.
Thank you, Steve. Let's go to Eva Pilgrim in Pennsylvania, where the president-elect's numbers continue to climb as well.
That's right. Right now, we know that Biden is up by more than 34,000 votes, and that is actually the magic threshold that we have been waiting for and watching for. He needed to be up by about 34,000 votes in order to avoid that half-point threshold that would require a recount, and he is above that margin at this point. We've been hearing celebrations all over Philadelphia as this announcement was coming through. People have been driving by, blasting Party in the USA and Handel's Messiah, Hallelujah blaring from their cars. There are a bunch of people that are now gathering on Independence Mall in front of Independence Hall, which is just down the street from me. There's a giant sign that says, "Good things happen in Philadelphia." They are celebrating, and this celebration looks something like the way Philly celebrates when their sports teams do well. They're dancing in the streets. Everyone's high-fiving and cheering each other, just enjoying this moment. And I want to touch on something that I've heard a lot of people reference, these allegations of voter fraud and misconduct. I spoke with a Republican Bucks County commissioner earlier today, and I asked him, I said, have you seen anything that makes you think that there was some sort of voter fraud? And he said, I want to read the quote. "Absolutely no bad things happening. No funny business, no fraud. We were meticulous as far as security." He also told me that he saw more excitement about this election than he has seen in his entire lifetime. And I think a lot of that excitement is coming from suburbs like Bucks County, and specifically with suburban women. I spoke with a lot of moms, George, and they all were really engaged. They were all talking on their mom text chats about this political cycle, about this election. And so many of them told me they just didn't like Donald Trump. They had to watch those press conferences repeatedly every day about COVID, and seeing him every day, they just couldn't keep watching, and they wanted something different. You heard Steve Osunsami say people wanted something just a little bit more boring, something more predictable, something that they felt more comfortable with when it came to politics, and they felt comfortable about Joe Biden. And in this moment, I can't help but think, I spent a lot of time on the campaign trail with Joe Biden, and there's not one stop that I ever made with him where he didn't mention the state of Pennsylvania and the way he was raised here. He talked so much about the values that he earned and learned in this state, talking about his grandfather. The No Malarkey bus tour was a reference to a phrase that his grandfather used to say. You have to think this has to be pretty special for him, that Pennsylvania was the state that put him over that 270 threshold, George.
Poetic justice for Joe Biden right there. Thank you, Eva Pilgrim. Nate Silver, you called it last night. You said you were telling your friends it is over. We were ready to finally say that today. And then when you look at all the numbers out there right now, it seems more and more likely that he's going to get the exact amount of electoral votes that Donald Trump won 4 years ago.
It looks like that. I mean, I think Georgia is actually fairly safe for Biden. One thing is that military votes and absentee votes overseas, it's a lot like diplomats, people that work in NGOs, they might be liberal. Also, the military is not necessarily a huge fan of Donald Trump. If you look at polls of officers, a plurality preferred Joe Biden according to Military Times. Arizona's a little bit closer. There are various fairly random batches of ballots still left to count. Trump has been gaining ground. I think it's less certain for Biden. But you see a fairly robust map for Biden, right? He wins in the Northeast, Pennsylvania. I think he'll win Georgia. He's probably the favorite in Arizona. He should be Nevada almost for sure. So having that broader strategy gave him more options if there was a polling miss. I mean, the polls were not as bad as your previous election. They're also not fantastic by any means, and yet he wins because he holds on and wins a bunch of states by a point or two that Clinton lost 4 years ago.
Nate Silver, thanks very much. I want to bring in Tom Friedman, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the New York Times. And Tom, I've been reading you for about 40 years, I think, and I've never seen you so impassioned as you have been over the last year or so as this campaign heated up. It seemed you were on a mission to make sure that you did everything you could to see that America elected Joe Biden, defeated Donald Trump.
Well, George, thank you for saying that, because I really thought America was on the ballot. I thought America was on the line. Everything we stood for as a country, everything we promoted in the world was at stake. That we could, like any country, can choose a bad leader for a short period of time and get over it. But if we had gone for 4 more years of this man, every norm we have, every value we cherish, every institution that we've elevated throughout our history would be corrupted by this man. And that's why I'm getting phone calls and text messages, George, from all over the world right now, from friends in India, Israel. They're just so happy, they're relieved, because they know what Donald Trump did to America and how important America is for the world. American optimism makes the world go round. American optimism and the sense that there's somewhere over the rainbow where justice can be upheld, where institutions actually work, where you don't have to bribe someone. And this guy, this terrible, terrible man, he turned America into a country whose motto was show me the money and get the hell off my lawn. And I am so happy he has been defeated. We have so much work to do, but we have been saved. I had a senior military officer who just wrote me, sent me a message, just said WHEW, because there are so many people knew how badly things would have gone had this guy been reelected.
Tom Friedman, thanks very much. Martha Raddatz, let's pick up on that a little bit. There was so much tension in this last year and a half, last 2 years, between the president and top military brass, between the president and institutions across the board, the intelligence community, and you wonder if we're going to return to some sense of normality there.
I think you will return to some sense of normality. You know, we have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, who, as I'm looking at those images from right near Lafayette Square, excuse me, the chairman was with President Trump when he went over there and had the protesters cleared out. The chairman apologized for that, said he never should have been near that. The military should not be politicized. He has about 3 years left on his term. And I would suspect, talking to many senior military leaders, that Joe Biden will probably keep him in that place. Because if you don't want to politicize the military, if that is what you do not want, and there are so many who believe that Donald Trump tried to do that, then leave in Mark Milley, and it shows you're not being political. But you have 500 senior military leaders, former military leaders, some very big names. Bill McRaven, who was the man who eventually led the raid on to kill Osama bin Laden. Many others in that who wanted Joe Biden. Bill McRaven wrote an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal saying he is pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, but it was just all about leadership. He just could not support Donald Trump. Others I have talked to, other senior military leaders who are now gone, really believed that if Donald Trump had another 4 years, it would be the end of democracy, and that overseas there would be such a horrific reaction, especially from our allies. But obviously Donald Trump had a lot of support too. Donald Trump had support from military leaders. But just go back to the campaign. The campaign, it was, I'm going to surround myself with generals. In the end, I think he has one who's still there supporting him in the White House. You know, he had Michael Flynn, John Kelly, H.R. McMaster. I can't even remember all the generals he hired. Obviously, you know, General Jim Mattis, who became Secretary of Defense, they all disappeared. And Donald Trump basically said he was smarter than the generals.
Martha Raddatz, thanks. Nancy Gibbs, former editor of Time Magazine, another institution under stress, of course, the American press. There was basically what appeared to be a war between the press and the White House over the last 4 years. The president quite clearly labeled the press the enemy of the American people. How much damage was done? How do we rebuild trust?
I think that's a question that a lot of newsrooms are going to be focusing on in the coming weeks and months. It was enormously damaging. I think, you know, it starts with what you've seen these last days. I think the networks were incredibly careful in how they handled this count, in trying to educate the public about what was going to be different this year, the kind of patience that would be required, being exceptionally transparent in their methods, even when they were under pressure to, you know, move faster, call the race. I think that was a crucial starting point. And it goes from here. Obviously, it'll make an enormous difference if you don't have a continuous message coming from the White House that caricatures the press as the enemy of the people, and I think that will be, clearly a very significant difference.
John Carl, you had a front row seat to this every day in that White House briefing room.
I did, and I saw a president and a White House that essentially declared war on a free press in this country. I remember vividly the first time the president used that phrase, enemy of the people, to describe the free press, and he did it repeatedly. He described the press as the opposition party. He told people not to believe what they saw with their own eyes. He told people not to believe what they saw in newspapers and on television newscasts. At the same time, George, I have covered 4 presidents. I never saw a president more aggressively court the press, interact with the press, take questions from White House reporters, follow the news. He had his DVR always in play, and he watched all the shows, because there was even a time right before his inauguration, nearly 4 years ago, when he called the 2 of us up after seeing something we had said on Good Morning America. He was very in tune to what was said and written about him, even as he tried to undermine faith in the press in the eyes of so many. And I think we have a challenge now as reporters and news organizations because he has effectively eroded the trust in much of this country and what they see in the mainstream media. And I think it is incumbent upon us to be completely transparent, as we are, and to rebuild that trust. He had the biggest bully pulpit in the world, and he used it for 4 years to undermine largely what we do.
John Carl, thanks very much. One of the Gio Benitez is outside the White House as the crowds continue to grow. Gio?
Hey there, George. Yeah, this is clearly becoming a massive celebration.
Oh, I'm sorry. Looks like we lost Gio right there. But we have gotten a little clip being played by Kamala Harris, her first reaction to the news. Show that.
We did it. We did it, Joe. You're going to be the next president of the United States.
The call for Biden as she was out on her run. Her mother called her with the news. Let me bring in Leah Wright-Rigueur, professor of history at Brandeis University. Your reflections on this moment.
Phil, I think this is a historic moment for many reasons. The first one, I want to focus on Kamala Harris. She has broken so many barriers.
Oh, we're having some technical problems right now. We'll try to get Leah Wright-Rigueur back as well. But Christy, I want to bring you in. As you see these crowds growing in the streets, I suppose that's to be expected as well. I want to ask you the question that I asked Heidi Heitkamp a while ago. How does Joe Biden reach out to the Trump supporters who actually have ears to hear what he has to say?
Well, the first thing you do is not listen to Tom Friedman. I thought that was just an awful diatribe by Tom. And it shows why the people who supported the president feel as if the elites in the media on both coasts don't listen to them, don't respect them, and don't think they should have a voice. And this is the problem, George. The problem that Joe Biden is going to find is that there's a large part of his party, and he said, I am the Democratic Party, in one of the debates, but he's going to have to deal with folks like that who really use adjectives and words and phrases and emotion that they accuse the president of using. Because let me tell you something, if you had turned that diatribe around and made it anti-liberal rather than anti-Trump, he would have accused the president of saying things like that. I think we need to be more respectful with each other's views. And there are 70 million people in this country who voted for Donald Trump on election day and in the weeks before. And so I think what Joe Biden needs to do is to close out the voices of those folks, or at least minimize them, and speak from his heart about being the American president. And I think if he does that, then he has a real chance to have those people listen, and to have those people make judgments on his policies in a way that's fair and appropriate. But that's to me, that's part of the problem. We have no reaction to that, no outrage to the language that was used there. I'm making my way into New York City now to come and join you in the studio, and listening to that, just made my blood boil, George. I'm not a bad person. I'm not a dumb person. And I voted for Donald Trump, and there's a lot of other people out there who did as well, and were thoroughly insulted by that diatribe, and it is indicative of what some people who have supported Vice President Biden think of those 70 million people who voted for Donald Trump.
Thank you, Chris. Rahm Emanuel, I think as this conversation unfolds, we get a sense of the magnitude of the challenge before Joe Biden right now.
You think? One thing is, I think, the way I look at this is, Joe Biden was derided in the primary because he said there is a bipartisanship, there is decency with people that you don't initially, on the face value, agree with. He was derided in the primary, survived that. He was derided in the general election. And I keep coming back to this. It is not a throwback. He will be respectful of other views. He was like that in the White House.
He was really criticized for that.
Well, I would say derided. Criticized is another word to describe it. I think he was more than that. I think he was ridiculed for it. That's just literally somebody from another era that didn't realize what had happened. The second thing is, look, in major moments in American history when you have the divisions bubble up to really explode, we complimented a lot of people. I want to compliment the American people. They thought something was askew here, and not that people that voted for Trump. They thought something was off kilter, and they brought it back on track. The other piece of this is Hillary Clinton ran, and in 2018 you had more women run than ever before. Now you have a woman vice president. We should not forget what she did to break all the shatters of glass. Barack Obama, the first African-American to make it to the White House, you could not even think of Kamala Harris on the ticket if he had not shattered that. And history moves that way and then cracks. And then the last thing, we keep talking about this division. We exacerbate it, I think, in the media. But life is complicated. Florida goes Republican and votes for a minimum wage. California, a major blue state, votes against gig employees and affirmative action in place employment. Life is not binary. It's more complicated than that, and I actually think Vice President Biden has a ability to try to, and what his history will be when you look at Abe Lincoln, you look at John Kennedy, will be to see a glimmer of decency in you and bring that forward. And I actually think for all of us who've lived, I think, in a very dark 4 years, this is going to be a relief. And my son, who was overseas when we were talking this morning, said, last night seeing Vice President Biden just reminded you what a president can sound like. And we've lost that, and we've lost it ourselves. And while Joe has the vice president has a big role to play, Kamala, we have a role to play, not just the media, the American people. And my hope is that he keeps that engagement. We just had an election. The world watched. 160 million Americans exercise their right of citizenship. That is a great thing we should be proud of.
And you wonder, and I want to bring this to Sarah Fagan, can that behavior be modeled now in Washington, across Washington, if we have a different kind of president inside the White House? You know, Ron was talking about the women elected, the glass ceiling being broken, more Republican women elected to the House.
More Republican women. And look, it's been a big success story for Republicans, and obviously a big success story for Democrats, as we're seeing on our screen right now. And maybe somehow in that moment, where really both parties won on Tuesday, that we can get back to some sort of normal governing structure. There are no doubt big divisions, and there are going to be big fights, including, very quickly on another COVID relief package. But I think the first couple deals that happen really will set the tone and the tenor of how this is going to go. And so, the president-elect would be wise to give a little on this and not demand so much as Nancy Pelosi has. And then the next time, Mitch McConnell's going to have to do the same. And if that can happen, we might be able to get back to a better structure.
Yvette Simpson, you come from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Is every side going to have to give a little?
I think certain sides have given a lot, and I think the question is, how much more do we need to give? I always say this, unity is great, but freedom is better. And there's a part of this population that has sacrificed their freedom time and time again for unity. And they're tired of it. Yes, we want to have compromise. Yes, we want bipartisanship. But it shouldn't cost people wages and health care and education. And so if you're asking us to come together, and that means that my world doesn't change, the people whose world needs to change doesn't change, I don't want that kind of unity. I want the kind of unity that leads to change for people who have waited for it. And if this pandemic hasn't showed us that we need to serve people first, and that needs to be a unifying message. The Republicans need to be on board, but actually taking care of people. If we can unify around that, I'm all for it. But if that means that we're going to compromise and we're going to continue to serve the 1%, the people who we have always served, that's not the kind of unity we need right now.
Yvette, go ahead, Ron.
Look, the vice president, let's just go, but a little history, I think, will reveal the future. Bill Clinton runs on a tax that makes the wealthy pay more in 2012 in the re-elect. It was the break point was 250. Vice President is assigned to go negotiate that. He does it with Mitch McConnell. The number wasn't at 250, it was at 400. In the end of the day, and then the Vice President got ridiculed, Barack Obama signed it. He's the president, he's the only one with the pen. And the fact of the matter is, when Barack Obama left office, the tax code was immensely more progressive than when he got in. And the Vice President, because he made it more progressive. He got a down payment on what the president set out. That is who he is going to be. I saw it in the healthcare pieces. I saw it in the Recovery Act. He knew how to find a person where they were and move them to where he needed them. And he did not make the perfect the enemy of good. If you walked away with 60%, and another classic of he and I did this with Bernie Sanders. Bernie wanted a public option. What Bernie asked for, and we said, okay, what is it going to take? He said, I really believe in community health care plans for preventive care. And we got that for Bernie. That's why it's law of the land. And that's how the Vice President's going to operate.
And importantly, that's how he campaigned as well. He campaigned as the candidate of reform, not revolution. That's what he told the American people.
And he has to be authentic to that, because what you don't want is the mask to come off and something else appears. Be who you were, because it's true to you. And people will know that what they just voted for is what they're going to get.
Thank you, Ron. Trevor Old is in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I guess you're seeing these divisions play out in real time?
Absolutely, George. This is the physical representation as we talk about unifying the country right now. These are the steps of the Pennsylvania State Capitol here in Harrisburg. As our camera zooms in, what you're going to see is down at the bottom of the steps, you have pro-Trump supporters who insist this election has been stolen, that there has been voter fraud here in Pennsylvania and across the country. And up at the top of the steps, we have a growing number of pro-Biden supporters who are celebrating, saying this is the result of 4 years of hard work and the result of every vote being counted. And when I talk to some of these demonstrators, particularly the pro-Trump demonstrators, George, and I think about how Joe Biden might have to try to unify the country, I don't know what would happen to sway these Trump supporters other than President Trump himself conceding. Because when I ask them about this election being stolen, they will tell me outright they don't believe any politician, Republican or Democrat, other than President Trump and his most steadfast supporters. I can also tell you that these allegations of widespread fraud typically do not go past the fact that they think that mail-in ballots that were received after election day are going to be counted here, which aren't part of this tally right now. Still, these demonstrators are growing by the minute here. I can tell you that police are very cautious right now. So far, there's a layer of about 10 steps separating these groups. But as tense as it has been across the country, it's playing out right here now on the steps of the Capitol, George.
Thank you, Trevor. I want to take that to Heidi Heidkamp. And Heidi, I guess this goes for both sides. Often the people in the streets don't represent the masses. You see, those are the people who are most engaged, most energized, most extreme. Perhaps talk about that from the perspective of Trump supporters. And again, we were talking about this a little bit before, but how Joe Biden can speak to those who are ready to listen, who are not the most militant, the kind who would run out into the streets.
You know, I think it's interesting you keep saying how Joe Biden can talk to them. You know, just like Democrats, not all Democrats believe the same stuff. All Trump voters are not born equal. Those are going to be the most radical and, quite honestly, the most dangerous that you see there, people who won't accept anything. But I would challenge Chris Christie a little bit and say, where is the extension of the hand? Typically, we have a concession speech when we get to this point. We're not going to get that. I think what you're going to get on Monday is rallies. I think the president is going to go out and rally and fight this, and that's certainly one option he has. There needs to be a prominent Republican, whether it's Mitch McConnell, whether it is McCarthy, who reaches out their hand and makes a statement right now that they're willing to work. And when you get that, you're going to get that bipartisanship that you need. But I think it's interesting. It's all about what Joe Biden should be doing. What should the Republicans be doing right now to reach out and say, we want to move this country forward?
That's a good question as well. I want to take that to John Carl. And John, picking up what John Santucci was talking about in our last hour, what the end game might look like here. I know there are a lot of different people fighting for the presidency here right now with lots of different kinds of suggestions. The question is, how does he get to some kind of settled view on what happened here, and then how does he speak to the country?
Well, I've been asking some of his closest advisors, some of his the people that have been with him every step of the way as he's gone through the election and the aftermath, and asked this question: will Donald Trump deliver a concession speech? And the answer that I've gotten from several of the people who are advising him in this moment, but who have not spoken to him yet about this, is that yes, he will, but it will be a Trump-style concession, and it's probably not going to be for a while, George. I mean, they are fighting right now. They have dreams of the Supreme Court somehow intervening and overturning the results that we have seen announced here today. So this conversation has not happened yet directly with the president. But I am told that Donald Trump will ultimately deliver a speech in which he concedes that the election didn't go his way. He will say, I'm told it will be full of grievance. He will say it was stolen from him. He will say that much of the last 4 years was an effort to steal his presidency, from the investigations to the way he was treated, he believes, by the news media, by the Democrats, by investigators. But that ultimately he will commit to a peaceful transfer of power, even as he says that this was an election that was stolen from him. So I think what you will hear, George, the concession you will hear ultimately, like I said, I think we're still days, if not weeks away from this, will be a concession, Donald Trump conceding that the election was stolen from him. That is unlike any concession speech we've ever seen in America.
Thank you, John. Let me bring that to Chris Christie. And Chris, I mean, first of all, do you see the president getting towards a more traditional concession speech, accepting that the American people have spoken and they've chosen another president, number one? And also, if you can respond, you heard Heidi Heitkamp's point as well. We took your point about what you're saying about Tom Friedman and the people who speak like him. Do Republicans, does the president have some kind of a duty, some kind of an obligation to also figure out a way to calm the waters and move on?
Well, I hope that he does that, George, but let's remember something. We all were saying, in the last couple of days, the votes need to be counted, and the president has a right to pursue the legal options that he wants to pursue, and he's going to pursue those. I would hope that if he pursues those legal options and that they turn out not to bear fruit, and I've said I haven't seen any evidence yet at all that they should, then he would do that, that he would make a speech that would be one that would help try to help people understand that the election is over and that we need to move on from where we are in the election. But you already have some Republicans saying things that I challenge right back to Heidi. Lindsey Graham said, just yesterday, that if Joe Biden's the president, he deserves to have his cabinet, and that if the Republicans control the Senate, that's not something that should be blocked. I mean, we are talking about 3 or 4 days after a very close contested election. I'm hopeful that what the president will do is to make that speech ultimately. I think it's more likely that it sounds like what John just talked about than what we would say is the traditional speech. But that's Donald Trump, and then you're not going to change who he is. But I do believe and always believe that there'll be a peaceful transfer of power here.
Thank you, Chris. I want to bring in Elsie Granderson on the phone right now. Joe Biden perhaps is an unlikely leader of the LGBTQ community, coming after a few years ago when he was still serving as vice president. He came out for gay marriage before President Obama did, and that became a theme throughout his campaign.
Yes, absolutely. When you were watching the Trump administration operate over the last 4 years, in the shadows, his administration was working very hard to undermine a lot of things that President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden did to help with the equality of LGBTQ people. And George, when you look at things such as not supporting the Equality Act, the attacks on transgender people, in the military, in the schools, in the emergency shelters with HUD and Ben Carson, there were so many things that were alarming to the community that Donald Trump was doing, that seeing Joe Biden, as well as Vice President-elect Kamala Harris in the White House, welcoming figures who will once again respect and protect this member of American society, is a huge relief for many of us, and me as an openly gay man who is married and was worried about my marriage. This is very good news.
Thank you, Elsie. Cecilia, let me come to you right now. Donald Trump's relationship with the Latino community, Joe Biden's relationship with the Latino community, I guess you could say it's complicated as well. We've talked often about his themes of the campaign on the wall, but at the same time, it appears that he did hold on to significant pockets of support among Latinos as well.
Yeah, he stayed pretty much steady throughout the course of his presidency at a 30% support of Latinos. But that's not to say that Latinos didn't overwhelmingly favor Joe Biden by widespread margins in this race. Complicated, yes, I guess I would say that. But I also think, George, it's worth pausing right now as we see these crowds out there celebrating. I think for the Latino community in this country, it is a moment of much of the Latino community in our country right now today, and seeing the results of this election brings a little bit of a sigh of relief, because the last 4 years, this is a community that has been demonized. It has been beaten. It has been kicked. It has been deported. It has been ostracized, and it has been alienated like I've never seen in my generation before. From day one. From the president coming down that escalator in Trump Tower saying that Mexicans are not sending their best people, they're sending, some of them are rapists, to those pictures of children in cages and children being separated from their families at their border, to people in the highest echelons of this administration like Stephen Miller, who are fervent believers of a very anti-immigration policy and rhetoric that the president very much carried out. And words matter in this country. 61 million Latinos in this country, and words matter because someone went to a Walmart in El Paso in 2018 and opened fire with the explicit intention of killing Mexicans. And that's what happens when you have words like this that are ugly in this country. So I think today, as we look ahead and try to move on from some of this pain that I think so many Latinos are feeling, there will be questions for Joe Biden on how much he can accomplish in terms of immigration. He has said that he will provide protections for DACA on day one. He has said that he will stop building that wall going forward. But he's got big hurdles in front of him if he really wants to do those things, because as we've been saying, he's got a mixed Congress, and it will be a big question as to how much he can actually accomplish. But I think in terms of Latinos feeling like second-class citizens in this country, many of them have felt that way for a long time. I think back to my young nephew, who at the very beginning, when we were seeing child separations, turned to my sister-in-law, said, "Our mom and dad, our grandparents going to be deported." Those are the messages that children in this country have felt and faced for the last 4 years. So I think there will be a little bit of a breather today.
Cecilia Vega, thanks very much. Terry Moran, as we've gone through this conversation over the last couple of hours, in some ways it's a reminder of how abnormal things have been over the last 4 years, how President Trump pushed the boundaries of what a president is, what a president could do, the kind of tension he would have between all of America's institutions. And you wonder now, does that have a lingering effect, or does it all simply wiped away when you elect a former vice president into the office of president-elect?
You know, it's hard to think of any president remotely like him. Maybe Andy Jackson was a kind of China breaker like Donald Trump. But there is something in the notion that without Donald Trump in the White House, he'll still have his Twitter feed. He'll still be a prominent public figure. Maybe a kingmaker in the Republican Party, might run again. But he doesn't have the bully pulpit of the White House. And there was something about that Twitter feed and something about the way he carried himself as president that seemed to give a lot of Americans permission to be the worst version of themselves. And you could see it in your own social media feeds. You could hear it sometimes in conversations, in personal interactions sometimes. People who were, more or less normal Americans prior to that. In other words, reputation of being frank with our views, but democratically courteous in a small d way. All of a sudden, it felt like I was back in the Balkans, in the 90s. And that this correction, if it is one, says something that there's a crucial middle in America that is conservative, not in a policy sense, in a go-slow sense. They aren't looking for, they know we've got it good in this country, and they're looking for radical change in affect or really in policy. We're having important fights, but they'd like to be conducted in a different way.
Matthew Dowd, conservative of the small c, and a majority who want to feel a sense of an American community.
Absolutely, George. And George, I was just recalling, I was chief strategist for George W. Bush, did his 2000 and 2004 race, and we all talked about motivation, but in the end, we won those races because of independence in the middle of the country. Barack Obama, after he got elected president, after the midterms, called me up invited me to the Oval Office after he got lost badly in the midterms, and he said, tell me what I did wrong. And I said, you became head of your party and not leader of the country, and you lost sight of the independence in this country. Donald Trump, in his first inauguration, asked me over to the White House and asked me what I thought he should do. And I said, you have to unify the country, forget partisan labels, and start appealing to the middle of the country. Look at the results of this election. Joe Biden is president-elect of the United States because of independence in the middle of the country. Joni Ernst, Republican, won Iowa as United States Senator because of independence and middle of the country. Everybody who won in this race across the country. We talk about party labels, and everybody says this is what the Democratic Party should do, and this is what the Republican Party should do. But the vast majority of this country is not so attached to those party labels. And Joe Biden, and I think he will because I think this is the kind of person he is, needs to focus right at the middle of the country. Listen to the left, listen to his own party, listen to the Republicans. But in the end, the independents in the middle of the country decide which way this country goes.
You know, I don't disagree with you, but let me press you on one point there. Often the problem is that those independents, that vast middle of the country, are also those Americans who are least politically engaged day to day. They're the ones who only come out perhaps at the very end. How does he keep them part of the process?
Well, George, I think that's a really good point, and I think you have to engage them. I think what happens often in Washington, D.C., is people forget the fact that the independents got him elected, and then they pay attention to their own party and their activists. And so I think he has to, and the Democratic Party has to, figure out a way to keep that engagement going. Let me give you a fact, George. More than 45 million independents voted in this election, the most ever in American history. 45 million independents voted in this election, and they decided in this election. So these leaders can't go back to Washington, get in their offices and call all their friends who are either D or R. They have to figure out a way to have a connection constantly with the independents.
Thank you, Matthew. Dad, Mary, Bruce, we're going to hear from the president-elect tonight.
George, Wilmington is getting ready for a party tonight. I can tell you they have had this stage set up here behind me all week long. They're back out there setting things up, getting everything ready. And, you know, just on the other side of me here, on the other side of the camera, just outside the security perimeter, we have seen people driving by, honking, cheering, families with young children. The poor Secret Service here is trying to move people along. But we are just about 10 minutes down the road from Joe Biden's house. The campaign has been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Joe Biden, as we have said, has been waiting to deliver this speech tonight for 30 years through 3 runs at the White House. We've gotten glimmers of what we may hear tonight in his remarks over the last few days. I suspect you will continue to hear him hit on the themes that he has been throughout this campaign, calling for unity, saying that he is the leader who can bring this country together. It is a massive task, but Joe Biden has made it very clear over the last few days that he's ready to get to work.
Massive task that begins right now. He won't be inaugurated until January 20th, David Muir. The period between now and then likely to be as unpredictable as the last 4 years.
Yeah, and I think that's why you've seen sort of over these last 4 days, Joe Biden and his team trying to decide when to come out and try to fill that void. And I'm sure that's going to be part of the strategy they immediately start working on between now and Inauguration Day. There's going to be a lot of time to fill with an emergency underway in this country, a national emergency with this pandemic. Joe Biden, every time he comes out in front of the cameras, and in fact, a couple of the times, he talked about the pandemic first instead of where this election stands. You know, the question you asked a moment ago, George, I thought was so important about whether or not what we're witnessing in this moment, if afterward, with Joe Biden as the president-elect, if some of this polarization, if Donald Trump without the megaphone of the White House, if suddenly he's just not quite as powerful a figure anymore. And I think that if he's not, he probably has himself to thank for that, because Donald Trump has created a culture in this country where every day is a new episode. And we saw that in this campaign. We even saw it in the campaign 4 years ago, but particularly now, where there's always just so much going on coming out of this White House. And we've all talked about it, that you have to decipher every single day between the noise that you hear and what's really important for folks at home, and how to help them understand how this could affect their lives on both ends of the spectrum, for Republicans and Democrats. And I wonder if some of that noise goes away, and if the power behind Donald Trump goes away, if again that's a reflection of the culture that he created, that America will move on just as quickly as they moved on day to day in trying to keep up with the Trump White House.
I can't tell from the last 2 hours of conversation if we're in for a quieter time or not.
Well, you know, I mean, the first thing that I'm looking at when I see all the people elated in various cities across the country, I'm also thinking about coronavirus, which Joe Biden has signaled is going to be one of his top priorities, and perhaps that national mask mandate is on the way. Wanted to just say really quickly, one Donald that's very happy today, Donald Harris. That is the father of Kamala Harris. Of course, she's the child of immigrants, mom from India, dad from Jamaica, mom a scientist, dad an economist.
Thank you, Lindsay. We're going to leave you right now. We will be back at 8 tonight for the speech from the former Vice President Joe Biden. But we want to leave you with one final moment from the campaign trail, one of the last campaign stops from Joe Biden. He went to his childhood home in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and wrote, "On the wall, from this house to the White House, with the grace of God." Joe Biden, President-elect of the United States, 46th American President.
We now join our regularly scheduled program already in progress.
Listen to music, okay?
This year, during the Medicare annual election period, I chose a new Medicare plan, and my decision was easy. It was a free decision guide from Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Minnesota that really helped me understand my options.
Find out how you can have all your Medicare benefits in one simple Blue Cross plan. Choose from a variety of plan options with monthly premiums as low as $0. Call now to request your free 2021 decision guide. You and Blue, because together is better.
Insta stories anytime you want them. Follow 5 on Instagram.
We now join our regularly scheduled program already in progress.
Daryl's family uses Gain Flings now, so their laundry smells more amazing than ever.
Isn't that the dog's towel?
Hey, me towel, suit towel. More Gain Scent plus Oxy Boost and Febreze in every Gain Fling.
Oh, you're gonna botch this, Baker. Too much heat, gonna burn up that meat. Step on the crack. Put your mother's back. Step on the crack. You're gonna get sacked. You're gonna blow it, Baker. Oh, you're gonna flood it.
He can only perform when he's under pressure.
Yep. Baker, still watching you.
Who's playing? Doesn't matter.
No.
Mom!
At Burger King, when you order a 2 for $5, you might get a side of PS5. 2 for $5, mix and match. Buy and play game in-app for a chance to win.
This year, Walmart turns Black Friday into deals for days. Starting Saturday, November 7th, score deals of a $49 gourmet toaster oven in-store and online. Let's end the year saving bigger.
This is the new iPhone 12 Pro with 5G, and it's on AT&T, the fastest nationwide 5G network.
Now new and existing customers can get our best deal.
Really? Mom, AT&T has the deal for new and existing customers. I will.
So what'd she say?
It's the wrong person. It's a guy named Carl. He's very excited and on his way.
Word of mouth advertising. It's what they did before commercials.
It's not complicated. Everyone gets our best deal, like the amazing iPhone 12 mini on us.
Sweetheart, do my forearms look bigger?
They look the same.